Everyone is looking for the next missile. But the more important thing in the Middle East right now is a clock, not one clock, several clocks. Iran has one running inside its oil storage tanks. America has one running inside its blockade. Lebanon has one running inside its villages. South of the Litani River, Israel has one running inside its exhausted army and fragile coalition. That is why this moment matters, not because peace has arrived, not because the war is ending cleanly, not because any side has suddenly become wise. It matters because every major player is discovering the same brutal truth at the same time. They can keep fighting, but they cannot keep fighting the same way forever. The headline is that Iran has reportedly put a new proposal on the table. Reopen the Strait of Hormuz if the United States lifts the blockade on Iranian ports and push the nuclear question into a later stage. That sounds like diplomacy. It is more than diplomacy. It is the first clear sign that Iran may be trying to separate the part of the war it cannot economically afford from the part of the war it cannot politically surrender. That distinction is everything. Iran is not saying we give up. Iran is not saying we accept Washington's nuclear terms. Iran is saying something narrower and more revealing. Lift the economic chokehold first. We can argue about the nuclear issue later. That tells you where the pressure is landing. For weeks, Tehran believed it had a working strategy. Wait out the Americans, assume Trump wants an early exit. Assume Washington and Israel will not commit to a full ground war. Assume an air campaign alone cannot bring down the Islamic Republic on that point. Iran was not wrong. Bombing can punish a state, it can destroy facilities, it can kill commanders, it can degrade systems, but bombing alone rarely turns a large, hardened ideological regime into a surrendering regime. Iran understood that, so it waited. Then Washington changed the game. The campaign shifted from daily military punishment to economic strangulation. Not just Operation Epic Fury, but something slower, colder, and in many ways more dangerous. Call it Operation Economic Fury. The American blockade is bleeding Iran every day. The source document puts the loss around $435 million for Dalton Y in exports and blocked imports. Oil movement has been choked, shipping networks have been hit, smuggling routes have been sanctioned, front companies have been exposed. A major Chinese-linked customer has been targeted. Iran. Linked cryptocurrency has been frozen. This is not cinematic. It is plumbing. And when the plumbing of a state starts to fail, speeches cannot fix it. Iran's problem is not one single blow. Iran has survived sanctions for decades. It has built shadow networks, informal finance, smuggling routes, and political habits designed for pressure. The problem is stacking. The rial was already collapsing before the war. Food inflation was already brutal. Bread and cereals had already become political warning signs. The internet blackout imposed for security had already drained tens of millions of dollars a day from an economy that could not afford another leak. Then came the blockade. Then came the sanctions. Then came the storage clock. That is the clock people should be watching. If Iran cannot export enough oil, the oil does not simply disappear. It fills storage. When storage fills, wells must be shut. When wells shut, revenue does not just decline. Production becomes harder to restart. Salaries become harder to pay, and the security state becomes more expensive to maintain. The Revolutionary Guard does not run on slogans alone. It runs on salaries, contracts, patronage, and the ability to tell its own people that resistance still feeds the system. That is why Iran's proposal matters. Not because Iran has suddenly become weak, because Iran may be trying to save the economic part of its position before the pressure forces it into a worse choice later. The offer to reopen Hormuz in exchange for lifting the blockade is not peace. It is triage. Iran wants to stop the bleeding while keeping the nuclear question alive. Washington has its own clock. Trump says America has all the cards in one narrow sense. Maybe he is, right? The United States has the Navy. It has the blockade. It has the Treasury. It can sanction, freeze, inspect, intercept, and squeeze in ways no other power can match. But having cards is not the same thing as having time. A blockade is useful only if it produces a political result before the costs spread beyond the target. If the blockade brings Iran back to the table on acceptable terms. Washington can call it leverage. It can say the bombing softened Iran, the blockade force movement, and American pressure opened the diplomatic door. But if the blockade does not produce a deal, the blockade becomes the war. That is a different problem. The longer it lasts, the more Iran looks for ways around it. The more Gulf states fear retaliation, the more oil markets price in disruption, the more China and Russia calculate how far they can support Iran without entering the fight directly. The more American allies ask whether Washington is ending the crisis or trapping everyone inside it. That is why the failed Islamabad talks matter. Iran's foreign minister landed, but refused to meet the American team while the blockade continued. Trump canceled his negotiators' trip. Iran moved on to Oman. Each side claimed it was the other side that needed to bend. Both sides are trying to convince the world that time hurts the other side more, but the truth is harder. Time hurts everyone. Look at Lebanon. Lebanon is not the center of the war, but it may be where one of the war's biggest consequences becomes visible. For decades, everyone knew the Hezbollah problem could not be postponed forever. The Lebanese state could not be fully sovereign while an armed movement inside the country held its own military infrastructure, its own foreign policy, and its own war logic. But no Lebanese government had the strength to solve it. Then this war changed the cost of avoidance. Southern Lebanon has been wrecked. Dozens of towns and villages south of the Litani have been evacuated. Bridges have been destroyed. People who fled north cannot simply go home because the geography of return has been broken. More than 1 million Lebanese have been displaced in a country that was fragile before this conflict swallowed it. And now, strangely, there is an opening. Lebanon and Israel have been talking at ambassador level. A ceasefire extension has been agreed. Beirut is trying to present itself as one voice, not merely as a front in an Iranian war. A president has finally been elected after years of paralysis. A new prime minister is trying to restore the idea that the Lebanese state is the state. That is real, but it is not enough. The hard part is phase 2. South of the Litani, the Lebanese armed forces can claim progress, rockets, and missiles have been removed. Officials can say state authority has been restored in an effective and tangible way. But everyone knows the question does not end at the river. North of the Litani is where Hezbollah is expected to resist, not rhetorically, physically. If the Lebanese army moves too hard, Lebanon risks violent internal confrontation. If it does not move hard enough, Israel will say Lebanon cannot secure its own territory. So Lebanon is also running out of time. If it accepts Israeli security demands, it risks looking less sovereign. If it demands full Israeli withdrawal without delivering Hezbollah disarmament, Israel will not believe the deal. If it confronts Hezbollah too quickly, it risks civil fracture. If it postpones the issue, southern Lebanon remains a wound that never closes. That is not a normal negotiation. It is a trap with multiple exits, all dangerous. Then there is Israel. For Israel, the clock is military, political, and psychological. Israel has been at war in one form or another since the 7th of October 2023 Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, the West Bank, reserve call-ups, emergency measures, endless fronts, endless arguments over what victory is supposed to mean. Netanyahu promised to change the face of the Middle East. Militarily, he can point to real damage. Iran has been struck, Hezbollah has been degraded, Hamas has been battered, southern Lebanon has been reshaped, buffer zones have appeared, Israel has shown that its reach is real. But the deeper question is cutting through the slogans. What has all of this bought before the 7th of October? Hamas existed in Gaza. After all the destruction, Hamas still exists. Before the war, Hezbollah was a problem. Today, Hezbollah is damaged, but the Lebanese state still cannot erase it. Before the campaign against Iran, Iran was a strategic threat. Today, Iran is damaged, but still standing. This is what strategic fatigue looks like. The public can still support the objectives and still lose faith in the government. As ability to turn military operations into a lasting result. That gap is where Netanyahu becomes vulnerable. The opposition has started to consolidate. Former rivals are presenting a united list. The old argument that no one else can govern Israel weakens when the current government cannot explain how the war ends. Inside the coalition sits another clock, the Haredi draft issue. Israel needs soldiers. The shortage is real. Reservists are exhausted. The war has lasted too long for old exemptions to remain a quiet side bargain. But Netanyahu's coalition depends on parties that treat those exemptions as existential. So Israel faces its own contradiction. The war demands unity. The political system produces fracture. The army needs manpower. The coalition needs exemptions. The prime minister needs victory. The public needs an ending. That is why this week feels different, because the old strategies are reaching their limits. At the same time, Iran can still resist, but the blockade is turning time into an economic weapon. America can still squeeze, but leverage only works if it produces a deal before the region starts pricing the blockade as the war itself. Lebanon can still talk about sovereignty, but sovereignty now requires confronting Hezbollah without breaking the country. Israel can still fight. But military achievement is no longer enough if the public cannot see a political ending. That is the real story, not one side running out of options. All of them running out of time. The danger is that time pressure does not always create peace. Sometimes it creates better negotiations. Sometimes it creates reckless gambles. Iran may try to trade Hormuz for relief. Washington may try to turn the blockade into surrender. Lebanon may try to turn crisis into sovereignty. Israel may try to turn one more campaign into the victory that the last campaign did not deliver. This is why the next move matters. Power now means more than the ability to strike. It means the ability to wait without collapsing, compromise without looking defeated, and stop before the pressure you created becomes pressure you can no longer control. Peace has not arrived, but time is finally visible.